In 1993, an entire family of 4 vanished without a trace from a luxury cruise ship in the Caribbean, leaving behind only empty staterooms and unanswered questions that would haunt investigators for a decade. But in 2003, a professional diver, exploring a coral reef off the coast of Barbados, discovered something that would change everything: a waterproof camera containing photos that were never meant to be seen. Marcus Delacroix adjusted his diving mask as the Caribbean sun beat down on his weathered face, the gentle sway of his boat creating a rhythmic dance on the crystal-clear waters 30 miles off Barbados. At 34, he had spent nearly half his life beneath these waves, but today felt different. The water seemed unusually calm, almost eerily still, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. He checked his equipment one final time, running through the familiar ritual that had kept him alive through countless dives. The coral reef below, stretched out like an underwater city, its vibrant colors visible even from the surface. This was supposed to be a routine documentation dive for the Marine Biology Institute, nothing more than capturing footage of coral bleaching patterns for their research. But as Marcus slipped beneath the surface, the silence that greeted him felt heavier than usual. The water was remarkably clear, offering visibility that extended far beyond the typical range. Schools of tropical fish moved in synchronized patterns, their movements creating living murals against the reef's backdrop. 20 minutes into the dive, something caught his eye. Wedged between 2 massive coral formations, partially buried in the sandy bottom, was a small rectangular object. At first glance, it appeared to be just another piece of debris, the kind of ocean litter that unfortunately plagued even the most pristine waters. But as Marcus swam closer, his pulse quickened. The object was a camera, its yellow waterproof casing somehow still intact, despite what appeared to be years of submersion. The brand name was barely visible through the accumulated marine growth, but the device looked remarkably well preserved. Marcus carefully extracted the camera from its coral prison, noting how the reef seemed to have grown around it, suggesting it had been there for years. His hands trembled slightly as he examined the find, knowing that cameras didn't simply fall into the ocean in the middle of nowhere. Someone had to have dropped it, lost it, or worse. The weight of the device felt substantial in his hands, and when he gently shook it, he could hear something moving inside. Film. After all these years underwater, there was still undeveloped film inside this camera. As he began his ascent to the surface, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was carrying more than just a lost piece of equipment. The ocean had kept this secret for years, protecting it within the embrace of living coral. Now, for reasons he couldn't explain, it had chosen to reveal its hidden treasure. Back on his boat, Marcus sat in the afternoon sun, staring at the camera in his hands. The serial number was still partially visible, and he could make out what appeared to be initials scratched into the casing. DM. Someone had taken the time to personalize this camera, to mark it as their own. He thought about the dozens of missing persons reports he'd heard over the years, the stories of people who had simply vanished in these waters. Pirates, accidents, sudden storms. The Caribbean had swallowed countless souls, leaving families with nothing but questions and an endless ocean of uncertainty. But this camera represented something different. It was evidence, proof that someone had been here, had captured images of their final moments. Whatever was inside could provide answers that families had been seeking for years. Marcus reached for his radio, hesitating for just a moment before making the call that would change everything. He needed to contact the authorities, to turn this mysterious discovery over to people who could properly investigate its origins. But deep down, he already knew that the images inside this camera would reveal something terrible, something that someone had never intended to be found. Detective Patricia Donnelly had seen her share of cold cases during her 15 years with the Barbados police force, but the call that came in that Tuesday afternoon would resurrect a mystery that had haunted the Caribbean for over a decade. The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Delacroix, a professional diver whose reputation for honesty and precision had made him a trusted contact for law enforcement. "Detective Donnelly, I've found something underwater that I think you need to see," Marcus had said, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "It's a camera, and it's been down there for years. There's film inside." Now, sitting across from Marcus in her cramped office at the Bridgetown police station, Patricia studied the yellow waterproof camera that lay between them on her desk. The afternoon sun streamed through the blinds, casting alternating shadows across the device that seemed to emphasize its mysterious nature. "Tell me exactly where you found this," Patricia said, pulling out a fresh notepad. At 42, she had learned that details mattered, especially when dealing with evidence that had been compromised by time and the elements. Marcus leaned forward, his hands still bearing the salt stains from his morning dive. "Approximately 30 miles northeast of Bridgetown, at a depth of about 60 feet. It was wedged between two large coral formations, but the reef had grown around it. Based on the coral growth patterns, I'd estimate it's been there at least 8 to 10 years. Patricia made careful notes, her mind already racing through the possibilities. "You mentioned initials carved into the casing?" "DM," Marcus confirmed, pointing to the barely visible scratches. "Someone took the time to personalize this. It wasn't just a casual tourist camera." The detective had already begun running the serial number through various databases, but she knew the real answers lay in the undeveloped film inside. The question was whether any images would survive after years of submersion, even in a waterproof case. "Marcus, I need you to think carefully about this," Patricia said, her voice taking on the serious tone she reserved for important matters. "When you found this camera, did you notice anything else unusual in the area? Any other debris, clothing, anything that might suggest what happened?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "The reef looked undisturbed, natural. But, Detective, there's something else you should know. That particular area where I found the camera, it's directly below one of the major cruise ship routes. Ships pass overhead regularly, especially the larger vessels heading to and from the southern Caribbean." Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. In her years of service, she had worked on several cases involving cruise ship incidents, but most were resolved quickly. Missing passengers were usually found, accidents were explained, and the cruise lines were generally cooperative with investigations. But there was one case that had never been resolved, one that still appeared in her unsolved files like a persistent ghost. The Morrison family disappearance from 1993. David and Rachel Morrison, along with their two children, Emma and Tyler, had simply vanished from the luxury cruise ship Celestial Dawn during what should have been a dream vacation. The case had made international headlines for weeks. An entire family, gone without a trace from a ship carrying over 2,000 passengers and crew. No one had seen them leave their stateroom. No one had witnessed them going overboard. They had simply ceased to exist somewhere between Barbados and St. Lucia. Patricia reached for a thick file folder in her desk drawer, the edges worn from years of handling. The Morrison case. She had inherited it from her predecessor, Detective Robert Hayes, who had worked the investigation until his retirement in 1998. "Marcus," she said, opening the file and revealing photographs of a smiling family, "does the name Morrison mean anything to you?" Marcus studied the photos, his expression growing serious as he took in the faces of David and Rachel Morrison and their children Emma and Tyler. David Morrison appeared to be in his late 30s, with dark hair and a warm smile. Rachel was blonde and petite, while their children looked to be around 8 and 10 years old. "I've heard about this case," Marcus said quietly. "It was before my time here, but every diver in the Caribbean knows the story. An entire family, just gone." Patricia pointed to the father in the photograph. "David Morrison, DM." She looked back at the camera. "Marcus, I think you may have just found the first real evidence in this case in over 10 years. The film development laboratory at the Barbados Forensic Department was a small, windowless room that smelled of chemicals and decades of investigative work. Patricia watched through the red-tinted darkness as technician Dr. Sarah Chen carefully removed the film canister from David Morrison's camera, her movements precise and deliberate. "After 10 years underwater, even in a waterproof case, we're looking at significant degradation," Dr. Chen explained, her voice barely above a whisper in the darkroom. "The salt water has a way of finding microscopic entry points, but this particular camera model was built for professional underwater photography. There's a chance," Patricia held, her breath as the technician began the delicate process of developing what could be the final photographs taken by the Morrison family. Each step seemed to take an eternity, the silence broken only by the gentle bubbling of the development chemicals and the hum of the ventilation system. Marcus stood beside Patricia, his diving experience making him acutely aware of how miraculous it was that anything had survived at all. "In all my years diving," he said quietly, "I've seen what the ocean does to electronics. The fact that this camera case held for a decade, it's almost impossible." The first image began to emerge in the developer solution, ghostly and indistinct at first, then gradually gaining clarity. Patricia leaned forward, her heart racing as recognizable shapes appeared on the photographic paper. It was a family photo, taken on what appeared to be the deck of a cruise ship. David Morrison stood with his arm around Rachel, both of them smiling at the camera. Emma and Tyler were in front of their parents, the ocean stretching endlessly behind them under a brilliant blue sky. "This appears to be the first day of their cruise," Dr. Chen observed, studying the image. "Look at how relaxed they appear, how fresh their clothing is. This was taken when they were still excited about their vacation." Patricia made notes as more images emerged. There were shots of the ship's dining room, the children by the pool, Rachel reading a book on a deck chair, while David played shuffleboard with Tyler. Normal vacation photos, capturing what should have been happy family memories. But as Dr. Chen continued developing the film, the images began to change. The timestamps on the photos showed they were progressing through the days of the cruise, and Patricia noticed something subtle but disturbing in the later photographs. In a photo dated 3 days into the cruise, David Morrison's smile appeared, forced, strained. Rachel was looking over her shoulder in several shots, as if checking to see if someone was watching them. Even the children seemed less animated, their poses more rigid. "Look at this one," Marcus pointed to an image that showed the family at dinner. "See how Rachel is gripping David's arm? And David's not looking at the camera, he's looking at something off to the side." Dr. Chen nodded as she moved to the next photograph. This one was taken from inside their stateroom, looking out through the porthole at the ocean. But reflected in the glass, barely visible, was something that made Patricia's blood run cold. A figure standing in the doorway behind them. "Can you enhance this reflection?" Patricia asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Chen carefully adjusted the image under a magnifying glass with special lighting. The reflection became clearer, revealing the silhouette of a man in what appeared to be a crew uniform. He wasn't posing for the photo, he was watching them. "This wasn't a casual visit from housekeeping," Marcus observed. "Look at his posture. He's deliberately staying in the shadows." The next few images were even more disturbing. They showed David Morrison alone, apparently taking photographs secretly from various locations around the ship. Shots of crew members in areas where passengers weren't supposed to be. Images of what looked like cargo being moved at night. Photos of people who clearly didn't know they were being photographed. David Morrison wasn't just on vacation, Patricia realized, her voice filled with growing concern. He was investigating something. The final photographs told a terrifying story. They were taken at night, in what appeared to be a lower deck of the ship. The images were grainy and dark, but they clearly showed several crew members moving large, wrapped packages. In one photo, David had captured 2 men arguing, their faces partially illuminated by the ship's emergency lighting. But it was the last photograph that stopped everyone in their tracks. It showed Rachel Morrison, her face filled with terror, reaching toward the camera. Behind her, a man's hand was gripping her shoulder. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., and the date was the night the Morrison family disappeared. "Dear God," Dr. Chen whispered. "They knew something was wrong. David was trying to document whatever was happening on that ship." Patricia stared at the final image, her mind racing with the implications. The Morrison family hadn't simply fallen overboard or suffered an accident. They had discovered something on the celestial dawn that someone was willing to kill to keep secret. "Marcus," she said, turning to the diver, "I need you to take me back to where you found this camera. There might be more evidence down there." As they prepared to leave the laboratory, Patricia couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far more sinister than a simple missing persons case. The photographs suggested a conspiracy, a cover-up that had lasted for over a decade. Someone on that cruise ship had been willing to murder an entire family to protect their secret. And now, thanks to David Morrison's courage in documenting the truth, that secret was finally beginning to surface. The dive boat cut through the Caribbean waters at dawn, its engines humming steadily as Patricia gripped the rail and fought against the seasickness that threatened to overwhelm her. She had never been comfortable on the ocean, but the urgency of returning to the dive site outweighed her physical discomfort. Marcus checked his diving equipment methodically, his movements practiced and efficient. "The currents are lighter in the morning," he explained to Patricia, who was watching him with obvious nervousness. "We'll have better visibility and more time to search the area thoroughly." Patricia had spent the entire night reviewing the Morrison case files, cross-referencing the photographs with the original police reports from 1993. What she discovered had only deepened the mystery. The official investigation had focused entirely on the possibility of an accidental drowning or suicide, despite the complete absence of any evidence supporting either theory. The cruise line was surprisingly cooperative back then, Patricia had told Marcus during their drive to the marina. Almost too cooperative. They provided passenger lists, crew records, even cabin assignments. But now, looking at David's photographs, I think they were controlling the narrative from the beginning. Now, as they approached the coordinates where Marcus had found the camera, Patricia felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. If David Morrison had been secretly investigating criminal activity on the ship, there might be more evidence hidden beneath the waves. Marcus suited up in his diving gear, double-checking his oxygen levels and underwater communication device. "I'm going to do a wider search pattern this time," he told Patricia. "That camera was wedged pretty deeply in the coral. If there's other evidence down there, it might take some looking." Patricia watched as Marcus disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only a trail of bubbles to mark his descent. She had brought along underwater metal detection equipment, hoping to locate anything else that might have been thrown overboard from the Celestial Dawn that night in 1993. 20 minutes into the dive, Marcus's voice crackled through the underwater communication system. "Patricia, I think I found something. About 50 yards southeast of where I discovered the camera." "What is it?" Patricia asked, leaning over the boat's edge as if she could somehow see through 60 feet of water. "It's a briefcase," Marcus replied, his voice tense with excitement. "Leather, partially buried in the sand. It's been here for years, but it looks intact." Patricia's heart raced. A briefcase could contain documents, evidence of whatever David Morrison had been investigating. "Can you bring it up safely?" "I'm securing it now," Marcus responded. "But Patricia, there's something else down here. About 20 feet from the briefcase, I can see what looks like clothing caught in the coral. Dark fabric, maybe a jacket or shirt." The implications hit Patricia like a physical blow. Clothing meant human remains might be nearby. The Morrison family might have been thrown overboard in this exact location, their bodies lost to the ocean depths. "Marcus, be very careful." "Down there," she warned. "If there are human remains, we need to treat this as a crime scene." As Marcus continued his underwater search, Patricia contacted the Coast Guard and requested additional support. This was no longer just a missing persons case. They were potentially dealing with a multiple homicide, and the evidence was scattered across the ocean floor. 30 minutes later, Marcus surfaced with the briefcase securely attached to his diving harness. The leather was waterlogged and discolored, but remarkably well preserved. As he climbed aboard the boat, water dripping from his wetsuit, his expression was grim. "The clothing is definitely human," he reported. "A man's dress shirt, caught in the coral about 15 feet down from where I found the briefcase. And Patricia," he paused, removing his diving mask, "there are other items scattered around the area. A child's shoe, a woman's purse, fragments of suitcases." Patricia stared at the briefcase, knowing that whatever was inside would likely provide the answers they had been seeking for over a decade. But she also knew that those answers would confirm her worst fears about what had happened to the Morrison family. "Let's get this back to shore," she said quietly. "And Marcus, I need you to mark the exact coordinates of everything you found. Down there. We're going to need a full recovery team." As they headed back toward Barbados, Patricia couldn't help but wonder what secrets the briefcase contained. and whether the truth about the Morrison family's disappearance was finally ready to surface after 10 years of silence. The briefcase sat on Patricia's desk like a time bomb, its water-stained leather surface hiding secrets that had been buried beneath 60 feet of Caribbean water for over a decade. The forensics team had carefully dried and documented the exterior before attempting to open it, but Patricia could feel the weight of anticipation in the room. Dr. Chen worked with painstaking precision, using specialized tools to carefully pry open the corroded clasps without damaging whatever contents might have survived the years of submersion. The leather had swollen and warped, making the process delicate and time-consuming. The briefcase appears to have a waterproof lining, Dr. Chen observed as she worked. If David Morrison was deliberately documenting something, he might have taken precautions to protect important documents. Patricia watched intently as the briefcase finally opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, were several manila folders, a small tape recorder, and what appeared to be shipping manifests. The plastic had done its job. Most of the contents appeared to be intact, though waterlogged. "Start with the tape recorder," Patricia instructed. "If it still works, it might give us David's own account of what he discovered." Dr. Chen carefully extracted the device, a small micro-cassette recorder that was popular in the early 1990s. After allowing it to dry completely and replacing the batteries, she pressed the play button. For several seconds, there was only static, and the sound of ocean waves in the background. Then David Morrison's voice filled the room, clear and urgent. "This is David Morrison, passenger on the Celestial Dawn, recording on March 18, 1993. If something happens to my family and me, I want there to be a record of what we've discovered." His voice was tense but controlled. "What started as a vacation has turned into something much more dangerous." Patricia leaned forward, hanging on every word as David's voice continued. "3 nights ago I couldn't sleep and went up to the deck for some air. That's when I saw them, crew members moving cargo in the middle of the night, large crates being transferred from one storage area to another. When I asked one of the crew members about it the next day, he told me it was routine maintenance. But I've been on enough business trips to know that cargo doesn't get moved at 2 a.m. unless there's a reason to hide it." The recording continued, revealing David's growing suspicions about the ship's activities. He had begun taking photographs and documenting unusual behavior among certain crew members. What he discovered was far worse than simple smuggling. "I managed to get a look at some of the shipping manifests," David's voice continued, now speaking in barely above a whisper. "The Celestial Dawn isn't just a cruise ship. It's being used to transport illegal weapons shipments throughout the Caribbean. The passengers are just cover, making it look like an innocent vacation vessel." Patricia felt her blood run cold. Arms trafficking was a serious federal crime, and the Caribbean was a known route for illegal weapons moving between South America and North America. If David Morrison had uncovered evidence of this operation, it would certainly be worth killing to protect. "Rachel thinks I should just keep quiet, enjoy our vacation, and report this when we get home," David's voice continued. "But I'm worried that if they suspect we know something, we might not make it home at all. I've noticed the same crew member watching our family for the past 2 days. Yesterday, someone searched our stateroom while we were at dinner." The recording became more urgent with the sound of footsteps in the background. "I'm hiding this briefcase. Tonight. If we don't survive this cruise, at least there will be evidence of what's happening on this ship. The operation is being run by someone in the crew, possibly multiple people. They're using the ship's legitimate Caribbean route to move weapons, and they're willing to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation." The tape went silent for several seconds. Then David's voice returned, barely audible. "Someone's coming. I can hear them in the hallway. Rachel, get the children ready. We might need to—" The recording ended abruptly in a burst of static. Patricia sat back in her chair, the full horror of the Morrison family's final hours becoming clear. They had stumbled upon a major criminal operation and paid for that discovery with their lives. But now, 10 years later, the evidence had finally surfaced. The question was whether the people responsible were still operating and whether they could finally be brought to justice. The shipping manifests from David Morrison's briefcase told a story that made Patricia's hands tremble as she examined them under the forensic laboratory's bright lights. Each document was a piece of evidence that had been underwater for a decade, yet the plastic wrapping had preserved them well enough to read the damning details. "Look at these cargo entries." Dr. Chen pointed to several lines on the manifest, dated March 17, 1993. Agricultural equipment, medical supplies, construction materials, all legitimate-sounding items, but the weights don't match typical specifications for these products. Patricia studied the numbers, her law enforcement experience immediately recognizing the discrepancies. A shipment of medical supplies weighing 800 pounds? That's either a massive quantity or something much heavier than medical equipment. Marcus, who had been quietly observing the analysis, leaned closer to examine the documents. "I've worked with shipping manifests for underwater salvage operations. These weight measurements are consistent with weapons shipments, assault rifles, ammunition, maybe even explosives." The manifests revealed a sophisticated operation that had been using the Celestial Dawn as cover for over 2 years before the Morrison family disappeared. The ship made regular stops in Colombia, Venezuela, and Jamaica, all known points in the international arms trafficking network. David Morrison was a customs inspector, Patricia realized, reading through his personal notes that had been found in the briefcase. He would have known exactly what these manifests meant. His job was literally to identify smuggling operations, but it was the final document in the briefcase that provided the most shocking revelation. Hidden beneath the shipping papers was a passenger list with several names circled in red ink, along with David's handwritten notes in the margins. He identified the passengers who were part of the operation, Dr. Chen observed, reading David's careful notations. "Look at this. Several passengers who booked adjoining staterooms but traveled with different last names. Passengers who had access to restricted areas of the ship." Patricia felt her pulse quicken as she read through David's observations. The arms trafficking operation wasn't just being run by crew members. Certain passengers were complicit, using their legitimate booking as cover while facilitating the weapons transfers. One name on the list made Patricia stop cold. Victor Castellanos, a passenger who had booked a luxury suite on the same deck as the Morrison family. Next to his name, David had written "Crew Access, Armed, and Watching Our Family." "Dr. Chen, I need you to run a background check on Victor Castellanos immediately," Patricia instructed. "If he was involved in this operation 10 years ago, there's a chance he's still active." While they waited for the background information, Patricia examined David's photographs more carefully, comparing them with the passenger manifests. In several images, she could now identify Victor Castellanos among the crew members moving cargo at night. He wasn't just a passenger. He was coordinating the operation. 20 minutes later, Dr. Chen returned with information that confirmed Patricia's worst fears. "Victor Castellanos is still alive and operating in the Caribbean. He's been arrested twice in the past decade on weapons charges, but never convicted. Currently, he's listed as a passenger on cruise ships operating out of Miami and San Juan." Patricia felt a mixture of excitement and dread. After 10 years, they finally had a suspect, but Victor Castellanos was still free and potentially still operating. The Morrison family's sacrifice had revealed a criminal network that was apparently still active. "There's something else," Dr. Chen continued, her voice grim. "Castellanos isn't traveling alone. Our intelligence sources indicate he works with a network of associates who infiltrate cruise ships as passengers while coordinating weapons shipments throughout the Caribbean." Marcus looked up from the documents he had been studying. "Detective, if this operation is still running, there could be other families at risk, other innocent passengers who might stumble onto something they shouldn't see." Patricia realized. They were dealing with more than just solving a decade-old murder case. They had uncovered an ongoing criminal enterprise that was using cruise ships as cover for international arms trafficking. The Morrison family had died trying to expose this operation, and now it was up to her to finish what David Morrison had started. "We need to contact the FBI and Interpol immediately," Patricia decided. "This is bigger than anything the Barbados police can handle alone. But first, I want to know which ships Castellanos is scheduled to board next." The hunt for Victor Castellanos was about to begin, and Patricia was determined that this time justice would finally be served for the Morrison family. The FBI field office in Miami buzzed with activity as Agent Sarah Martinez reviewed the Morrison case files that Patricia had sent ahead. When Patricia arrived by emergency flight that afternoon, she found herself in a sterile conference room, surrounded by federal agents, maritime crime specialists, and intelligence analysts who had been tracking Caribbean arms trafficking for years. "Detective Donnelly," Agent Martinez said, extending her hand in greeting. "What you've uncovered changes everything we thought we knew about weapons trafficking in this region. Victor Castellanos has been on our radar for over 5 years, but we've never been able to connect him directly to specific operations." Patricia set David Morrison's briefcase on the conference table, the physical evidence that had spent a decade underwater now serving as the key to a major federal investigation. "The Morrison family died for this information. I want to make sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain." Agent Martinez nodded solemnly before turning to a large monitor that displayed current cruise ship schedules throughout the Caribbean. "Based on our intelligence, Castellanos is scheduled to board the Majestic Seas tomorrow morning in San Juan. It's a 7-day Caribbean cruise with stops in St. Thomas, Barbados, and Jamaica." The irony wasn't lost on Patricia. Castellanos was about to follow almost the exact same route that the Celestial Dawn had taken in 1993, when the Morrison family discovered his operation and paid with their lives. "We believe he's using a new identity," Agent Martinez continued, "but facial recognition software has confirmed it's the same individual. He's traveling with 2 associates, both with extensive criminal records related to weapons trafficking." Patricia studied the surveillance photos of Castellanos, seeing a man in his 50s with graying hair and cold, calculating eyes. This was the face of someone who had murdered an entire family to protect his criminal enterprise, and he had been operating freely for 10 years. "What's the plan?" Patricia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We're going undercover," Agent Martinez replied. "A team of federal agents will board the Majestic Seas as passengers. Our goal is to document his current operation and arrest him with enough evidence to ensure conviction." But Patricia had a different idea, one that carried significant personal risk but offered the best chance of gathering the evidence they needed. "I want to go undercover as well. As a passenger, not law enforcement. Castellanos doesn't know about the Morrison evidence we've recovered. If he thinks his secret is still safe, he might be less cautious." Agent Martinez shook her head immediately. "Detective, that's not advisable. Castellanos has already killed 4 people to protect his operation. If he suspects you're investigating him—" "That's exactly why it might work," Patricia interrupted. "He eliminated the Morrison family because they were ordinary passengers who stumbled onto something they shouldn't have seen. If I can present myself as just another tourist, I might be able to observe his operation without triggering his suspicions." The room fell silent as the federal agents considered Patricia's proposal. She understood the risks, but she also knew that David Morrison had died trying to gather evidence against this criminal network. She owed it to his family to see the investigation through to its conclusion. "There's one more thing," Agent Martinez said after a long pause. "Our intelligence suggests that Castellanos isn't just moving weapons anymore. We believe he's expanded into human trafficking, using cruise ships to transport victims throughout the Caribbean." Patricia felt sick at the thought. If Castellanos had escalated his criminal activities to include human trafficking, there could be innocent people suffering right now while he operated freely on luxury cruise ships. "All the more reason to stop him," Patricia said firmly. "The Morrison family discovered his weapons operation 10 years ago. If he's expanded into human trafficking, who knows how many more lives are at stake?" Agent Martinez looked around the room at her colleagues, then back at Patricia. "Detective Donnelly, if we approve this operation, you'll be completely on your own once you board that ship. We can provide backup and surveillance, but if Castellanos becomes suspicious, you'll be in immediate danger." Patricia thought about David Morrison's voice on that tape recording, desperate and frightened but determined to document the truth, even as danger closed in around his family. She thought about Rachel Morrison reaching toward the camera in terror, and about Emma and Tyler, 2 innocent children who had died because of one man's greed. "I understand the risks," Patricia said quietly, But Victor Castellanos has been free for 10 years, while the Morrison family lies at the bottom of the ocean. It's time to bring him to justice. The port of San Juan bustled with activity as Patricia walked up the gangway of the majestic seas, her heart pounding beneath the casual facade she had carefully constructed. She wore a bright sundress and carried a cheerful beach bag, playing the role of a middle-aged woman treating herself to a solo Caribbean vacation after a difficult divorce. The cover story had been crafted meticulously by the FBI behavioral team. Patricia was now Linda Harris, a recently divorced teacher from Ohio who had decided to take her first cruise alone as a way of starting fresh. The identity was believable, unremarkable, and most importantly, completely unthreatening to someone like Victor Castellanos. As she made her way through the ship's opulent lobby, Patricia couldn't help but compare it to the photographs David Morrison had taken aboard the Celestial Dawn. The luxury cruise industry had evolved significantly in the past decade, but the basic layout and operations remained remarkably similar. Her stateroom was on Deck 7, strategically chosen by the FBI to be close to the areas where Castellanos and his associates were likely to conduct their operations. Agent Martinez had explained that arms traffickers typically used the lower decks and service areas of cruise ships, places where passengers rarely ventured. After unpacking her carefully selected belongings, Patricia made her way to the ship's main dining room for the welcome dinner. This would be her first opportunity to observe Castellanos in person, and she needed to be extremely careful not to draw his attention while studying his behavior. The dining room was filled with families, couples and solo travelers, all excited about their upcoming Caribbean adventure. Patricia found herself assigned to a table with 6 other passengers, including an elderly couple from Canada and a young honeymoon couple from Texas. Then she saw him. Victor Castellanos sat 3 tables away, dining with 2 other men who Patricia recognized from the FBI surveillance photos as his known associates. Even from a distance, she could see that he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. His eyes constantly scanned the room, taking note of everyone around him. Patricia forced herself to focus on the conversation, at her table laughing at appropriate moments and asking the questions that a first-time cruiser would naturally ask. But her attention kept drifting to Castellanos, watching as he engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation, while his eyes continued their methodical surveillance of the dining room. After dinner, Patricia followed the crowd to the ship's main theater for the welcome show. She positioned herself where she could observe Castellanos without being obvious about it. During the performance, she noticed him check his phone multiple times and exchange subtle hand signals with crew members who were working the theater. The realization hit her like a cold wave. The operation hadn't changed in 10 years. Castellanos was still using crew members as part of his trafficking network, just as David Morrison had discovered aboard the Celestial Dawn. Later that evening, Patricia walked the ship's decks, familiarizing herself with the layout while maintaining her cover as a curious tourist. As she passed by the service areas on Deck 3, she heard voices speaking in hushed Spanish. Slowing her pace, she pretended to study a piece of art on the wall while listening carefully. The conversation was brief, but she caught enough to understand that something was being moved from storage to a different location during the night. One voice mentioned the cargo from San Juan and pickup in St. Thomas. Patricia's blood ran cold. They were already moving illegal materials, just as they had 10 years ago when the Morrison family had stumbled onto their operation. As she made her way back to her stateroom, Patricia noticed a crew member watching her from the end of the corridor. When she looked back a second time, he had disappeared, but the feeling of being observed lingered. Back in her room, Patricia used the secure satellite phone the FBI had provided to send a brief coded message to Agent Martinez. The operation was definitely active, and Castellanos was using the same methods that had gotten the Morrison family killed. But as she prepared for bed, Patricia couldn't shake the feeling that something had already gone wrong. The crew member who had been watching her, the way Castellanos had scanned the dining room, the precision of the hand signals she had observed. She was supposed to be an unremarkable tourist, but Patricia had the unsettling suspicion that Victor Castellanos already knew exactly who she was. Patricia woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her stateroom. The ship's gentle rocking motion normally would have been soothing, but every creak and distant sound now carried an ominous weight. She lay still in the darkness, listening as the footsteps paused directly outside her door. For several long minutes, there was silence. Then she heard the soft click of someone trying her door handle. Patricia's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the secure phone hidden in her suitcase, but the sound of retreating footsteps made her pause. She waited another 10 minutes before moving, then carefully peered through the peephole. The corridor was empty, but a small piece of paper had been slipped under her door. With trembling hands, she picked it up and read the message written in block letters. "Stop looking or join the Morrisons." The threat was clear. Victor Castellanos knew exactly who she was and why she was aboard the majestic seas. Her cover had been blown, and now she was in the same deadly situation that had cost the Morrison family their lives 10 years ago. Patricia quickly coded a message to Agent Martinez, but when she tried to send it through the satellite phone, she discovered the device was dead. Either the signal was being jammed, or someone had managed to disable it remotely. She was now completely cut off from FBI support, alone on a ship in the middle of the Caribbean, with a killer who had already proven he was willing to murder entire families. Despite the terror coursing through her veins, Patricia knew she had to continue gathering evidence. David Morrison had been in this exact position, knowing he was in mortal danger, but determined to document the truth. She owed it to his memory to see the investigation through. At dawn, Patricia forced herself to maintain her cover, dressing in tourist clothes and making her way to the breakfast buffet as if nothing had happened. But she kept the threatening note in her pocket as evidence, and she made sure to stay in public areas where there would be witnesses. Castellanos was already in the dining room when she arrived, sitting with his 2 associates and what appeared to be several crew members who were off duty. When he noticed Patricia, he smiled and raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. The message was clear. He was in control, and she was powerless to stop him. During breakfast, Patricia overheard fragments of conversation from Castellanos' table. They were discussing the upcoming stop in St. Thomas, and she caught references to the pickup and new cargo. It became clear that St. Thomas wasn't just a tourist stop, it was where they would be transferring weapons and possibly human trafficking victims. As the ship approached St. Thomas that afternoon, Patricia positioned herself on Deck 5 where she could observe the docking procedures. She watched as legitimate passengers disembarked for their shore excursions, but she also noticed several crew members preparing cargo containers that definitely weren't part of the standard tourist operations. Then, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Among the passengers preparing to disembark in St. Thomas were 3 young women who looked terrified and disoriented. They stayed close together, constantly looking around as if expecting danger, and they were being closely watched by 2 men, who Patricia recognized as part of Castellanos' network. The women weren't tourists. They were trafficking victims being transported through the Caribbean under the cover of a legitimate cruise operation. Patricia knew she had to act, despite the danger to herself. These women were in immediate peril, and there might not be another opportunity to save them before they disappeared into the trafficking network permanently. Using the ship's public computer terminal, Patricia composed an urgent email to Agent Martinez, detailing everything she had observed and requesting immediate intervention in St. Thomas. She used coded language that she hoped would get past any surveillance, but she knew that sending the message would likely seal her fate. As she hit the send button, Patricia felt someone approach behind her. She turned to find Victor Castellanos standing just a few feet away, no longer pretending to be a harmless fellow passenger. "Ms. Harris," he said, his voice carrying a deadly calm. "Or should I say, Detective Donnelly, I think it's time we had a private conversation." Patricia's mind raced as Victor Castellanos gestured for her to follow him away from the computer terminal. She knew that going anywhere private with him would likely mean her death, but refusing would only confirm his suspicions and potentially put other passengers at risk. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Patricia said, forcing her voice to remain steady while staying in the crowded computer area. "I'm just Linda Harris from Ohio. I don't know what you're talking about." Castellanos smiled, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Detective Patricia Donnelly, 15 years with the Barbados Police Force, currently investigating the Morrison family disappearance. Should I continue, or would you prefer to drop the charade? The precision of his information sent chills through Patricia's body. Not only did he know her real identity, but he had somehow accessed detailed information about her background and current investigation. This suggested a level of organization and resources far beyond what she had expected. "You seem to know a lot about me," Patricia replied, still maintaining her position near other passengers. "But I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else." "The same way David Morrison had me confused with someone else 10 years ago," Castellanos asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "He thought he was clever too, taking pictures and recording conversations. Look how that ended for his family." Patricia felt sick at the casual way he referenced the Morrison murders, but she also recognized an opportunity. If she could get him to admit his involvement in their deaths while other people were nearby, she might be able to create enough of a disturbance to escape. "I don't know anything about the Morrison family," she said, raising her voice slightly to attract attention from nearby passengers. "And I don't appreciate being threatened by a stranger." Several tourists looked in their direction, and Patricia saw Castellanos's jaw tighten with annoyance. He clearly preferred to operate in shadows, away from witnesses and public scrutiny. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he said, reaching for her arm. But before he could touch her, the ship's public address system crackled to life with an announcement that made both of them freeze. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison speaking." The voice was crisp and authoritative. "We have received reports of suspicious activity aboard our vessel. All passengers are asked to remain in public areas while security conducts a routine inspection. We apologize for any inconvenience." Patricia felt a surge of hope. Her email to Agent Martinez had gotten through, and somehow the FBI had managed to coordinate with the ship's security. But her relief was short-lived when she saw the expression on Castellanos's face. "Clever," he said quietly, "but you've just made things much more complicated for everyone aboard this ship." Before Patricia could respond, she heard shouting from the lower decks. Through the large windows overlooking the port area, she could see FBI agents and local law enforcement swarming the docks of St. Thomas. The 3 women she had identified as trafficking victims were being escorted to safety, while several men in crew uniforms were being arrested. Castellanos followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. 10 years of careful planning, ruined by another amateur detective who couldn't mind her own business. "Just like the Morrison family?" Patricia asked, no longer bothering to maintain her cover. "They were just on vacation when they discovered your operation." "The Morrison family was in the wrong place at the wrong time," Castellanos replied, his mask of civility finally slipping away completely. "David Morrison should have kept his mouth shut and enjoyed his cruise. Instead, he decided to play hero." "So you killed them," Patricia stated, hoping to get a clear admission that could be used as evidence. "I protected my business," Castellanos corrected. "Just like I'm going to protect it now." He reached into his jacket, and Patricia saw the flash of metal. But before he could draw whatever weapon he was carrying, ship security officers appeared from multiple directions, surrounding them both. "Mr. Castellanos," the head of security said, his hand resting on his radio, "the FBI would like to have a word with you." For the first time since Patricia had encountered him, Victor Castellanos looked genuinely surprised. His operation had been compromised, his associates were being arrested, and his 10-year reign of terror in the Caribbean was finally coming to an end. But as the security officers moved to detain him, Patricia realized that Castellanos still had one final card to play. His hand remained inside his jacket, and his eyes held the desperate look of a man with nothing left to lose. The confrontation that had begun with David Morrison's camera 10 years ago was about to reach its deadly conclusion. The tension in the computer area was electric as Victor Castellanos slowly withdrew his hand from his jacket, revealing a small pistol that he kept low and partially concealed from the other passengers. The ship security officers immediately recognized the threat, but they were caught in an impossible situation with innocent tourists all around them. "Everyone needs to step back slowly," the head of security said in a calm but urgent voice. "Sir, please put down the weapon, and we can resolve this peacefully." Patricia felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her investigation had led to this moment, and now other passengers were in danger because of her determination to solve the Morrison case. She could see families with children nearby, elderly couples who had come on this cruise to enjoy their retirement, young honeymooners who had no idea they were witnessing the culmination of a decade-long manhunt. "You don't understand," Castellanos said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "I'm not going to prison. I've built something here, created an empire that spans the entire Caribbean. I won't let one dead family destroy everything I've worked for." "The Morrison family isn't dead to us," Patricia said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "David Morrison's evidence has been waiting for 10 years to bring you to justice. His children's voices are finally being heard." Castellanos's eyes flicked toward her, and she could see the calculation behind them. He was considering his options, weighing the possibility of using her as a hostage against the certainty of being arrested if he surrendered. But then something unexpected happened. The ship's public address system crackled to life again, but this time it wasn't the captain's voice that filled the air. It was a recording, clear and unmistakable despite the decade that had passed since it was made. "This is David Morrison, passenger on the Celestial Dawn, recording on March 18, 1993. If something happens to my family and me, I want there to be a record of what we've discovered." Patricia realized that Agent Martinez had somehow accessed the ship's communication system and was broadcasting David's final recording to the entire vessel. Passengers throughout the ship were hearing the desperate voice of a father trying to protect his family while documenting a criminal conspiracy. Castellanos's face went pale as David Morrison's voice continued, describing the weapons trafficking operation and naming Victor Castellanos specifically as the man who had been watching their family. The recording was being heard by over 2,000 passengers and crew members, creating an army of witnesses to his crimes. "10 years ago, you silenced one family," Patricia said, taking advantage of Castellanos' distraction. "But you can't silence everyone on this ship." The recording reached its climactic moment, David's voice becoming urgent as he described someone approaching their stateroom. "Someone's coming. I can hear them in the hallway. Rachel, get the children ready. We might need to—" The static that followed was heartbreaking in its finality. As the recording ended, an eerie silence fell over the computer area. Even Castellanos seemed stunned by hearing the voice of the man he had murdered a decade ago. The gun in his hand trembled slightly, and Patricia could see that his composure was finally cracking. "That's the voice of a hero," Patricia said quietly. "A father who died trying to protect not just his own family, but all the innocent people who would suffer because of your operation. David Morrison's courage brought us to this moment." Ship security used Castellanos' momentary distraction to close the distance between them. In one swift motion, the head of security tackled him to the ground while other officers secured the weapon. The arrest was over in seconds, but the emotional impact lingered in the air. As handcuffs clicked around Castellanos' wrists, Patricia felt a complex mixture of relief, triumph, and profound sadness. Justice was finally being served for the Morrison family, but it couldn't bring back David, Rachel, Emma, and Tyler. Their sacrifice had ultimately led to the downfall of a criminal empire, but the cost had been immeasurable. Detective Donnelly, Agent Martinez's voice came through a nearby security radio. "We have Castellanos in custody, and his entire network is being dismantled across 3 countries. The Morrison family can finally rest in peace." Patricia looked around at the passengers, who had witnessed the arrest, many of them in tears after hearing David Morrison's final recording. They had become unwitting participants in a story of courage and justice that had taken 10 years to reach its conclusion. The Caribbean waters that had hidden the Morrison family's evidence for a decade had finally given up their secrets, and Victor Castellanos would never hurt another innocent family again. 6 months later, Patricia stood on the deck of a small charter boat in the same Caribbean waters where Marcus Delacroix had discovered David Morrison's camera. The morning sun cast golden reflections across the gentle waves, and for the first time since beginning this investigation, The ocean felt peaceful rather than ominous. Beside her stood Marcus, now wearing a suit instead of his diving gear, and Agent Martinez, who had flown in from Miami for this solemn ceremony. In Patricia's hands was a brass urn containing memorial flowers, and in her heart was a sense of closure that had taken a decade to achieve. "The trial concluded yesterday," Agent Martinez reported quietly. "Victor Castellanos was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His testimony helped us dismantle trafficking networks in 12 countries, and over 200 victims have been rescued and returned to their families." Patricia nodded, grateful for the justice that had finally been served, but her thoughts were focused on the family whose courage had made it all possible. David and Rachel Morrison and their children Emma and Tyler had paid the ultimate price for stumbling upon a criminal conspiracy, but their sacrifice had ultimately saved countless other lives. The weapons trafficking operation generated over $50 million in illegal profits during the 10 years it operated after the Morrison murders, Agent Martinez continued. "That money has been seized and will be used to fund victim services and anti-trafficking programs throughout the Caribbean." Marcus stepped forward, his weathered hands holding a second urn containing sand from the coral reef where he had discovered the camera. "I've been diving these waters for 20 years, he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've seen the ocean keep secrets and reveal them when the time is right." The Morrison family's story was meant to be told. As they prepared for the memorial service, a small Coast Guard vessel approached their charter boat. Patricia watched as 4 honor guards carefully transferred 4 smaller urns to their boat. Through the cooperation of multiple governments and extensive forensic work, the Morrison family's remains had finally been recovered from the ocean floor and properly identified. The ceremony was simple, but deeply moving. Patricia read from David Morrison's own words taken from his final recording. "If something happens to my family and me, I want there to be a record of what we've discovered." His courage in documenting the truth, even in the face of mortal danger, had ultimately brought down an international criminal empire. Marcus spoke about the ocean's role in preserving evidence and memories, how the Caribbean waters had protected David's camera and briefcase for a decade until the right moment for discovery. Agent Martinez honored the Morrison family's unwitting sacrifice in the fight against human trafficking, noting that their evidence had led to the rescue of hundreds of victims. As they released the memorial flowers into the water, Patricia felt a profound sense of completion. The Morrison family had been seeking justice for 10 years, and now they could finally rest in peace, knowing that their deaths had not been in vain. "Detective Donnelly," Agent Martinez said as they watched the flowers drift across the waves, "the FBI would like to offer you a position with our Caribbean task force. Your work on this case has shown exceptional dedication and skill." Patricia considered the offer, looking out at the endless expanse of blue water that had both hidden and revealed the truth about the Morrison family. "I appreciate the offer," she replied, "but I think I need to stay in Barbados. There are other cold cases, other families who deserve answers." As their boat headed back toward shore, Patricia reflected on the journey that had begun with Marcus's underwater discovery and ended with justice for an entire family. The Morrison case had taught her that sometimes the ocean keeps secrets not to hide the truth, but to preserve it until the right moment for revelation. David Morrison's camera had spent 10 years beneath 60 feet of Caribbean water, waiting for the right person to find it at the right time. His family's story had finally been told, their killers brought to justice, and their sacrifice honored. The Morrison family was home at last, their final rest in the peaceful waters they had loved enough to visit, and their legacy would live on in every victim rescued and every criminal brought to justice because of their courage. In the distance, cruise ships continued their routes across the Caribbean, carrying families on vacation adventures. But now, thanks to the Morrison family's sacrifice, those waters were safer for everyone who traveled them.